Hi, and welcome to this introduction to Pro C3, the latest version of FabFilter's compressor plugin. I'm going to start with this pad sound from a couple of instances of Twin 3 plus some delay and reverb. Not an obvious choice for a compressor demo, you might think, given the lack of transients. But what I actually want is some rhythmic sidechain ducking. So I'll switch it to key from the external sidechain input, and I guess now I have to create a dummy kick drum track to feed it. Oh, wait, what's this? Host sync? I guess that dummy track won't be needed after all. If you want regular 4-to-the-floor ducking or some other beat division, it's right there already, no need to faff. You can even scale the tempo arbitrarily in case you want to do complex polyrhythmic stuff. Otherwise, this will behave just like it would with an external trigger signal. You can adjust the threshold and ratio to control how much ducking you get. Use the range control, which is now a cool curvy slider, to set a limit on the depth of the ducking. Adjust attack, and especially release, to control the shape of the ducking. You can also get meaningfully different behaviour from the different styles. The pumping style isn't new, but deliberately calls attention to itself with that release shape. Notice how differently the new VariMu style reacts. But we still have a variety of ways to make this more obviously pumpy. I could increase the hold time to create a pause before the release kicks in. Or I could increase the duration of the trigger signal instead, which is similar but slightly different. A nice little quality of life change. If I'm done tweaking the sidechain settings, I can now close this sidechain panel without losing the changes I made in it. The sidechain tab is highlighted to indicate something in there has been tweaked, but it doesn't need to stay open for those changes to remain active. This also means that you can browse the presets using the fancy new preset browser without that panel popping open every time you load a preset that uses it. You'll just see the sidechain tab start to glow instead. Okay, what if you need to duck from a more complex pattern than just a 4-floor? Well, depending on your DAW and your setup, you might find it more convenient to route the MIDI from your kick instead of the audio. Then switch to MIDI triggering, and now this bass part is being ducked by the kick. Before I move on, notice the little button underneath the style menu. This opens up the character tab, where we can add saturation and drifty analog goodness. Hallelujah. 3 different flavours are available. Let's try tube first, which gets gloriously growly on this bass part. It gets more obvious if I switch the saturation before the compression, so it's not tamed by the ducking. The diode character is quite different, smoother and more controlled. This one can be pushed harder on many sources. Let's crank up the input gain so you can hear that. Finally, the bright mode is good for adding a glossy sheen, which I can't really demonstrate on this bass part. So I'm going with the tube saturation. I'm going to switch it post-compression so the saturation reacts to the compressor ducking. Then dial it back a bit so the growl just starts to creep in at the top of each volume swell. If I toggle the character on and off, you can hear how big a difference even this more subtle setting makes. Okay, here's an instance on the drum bus, using the new TTM style. This is a complex multi-band algorithm which combines downward processing above the threshold with upward processing below it. As a result, the threshold control works very differently to the other algorithms. Use it to control which part of that transfer curve you're riding. Then you can use the ratio to decide how much of that squashiness you want. This is a great way to get very powerful multiband processing without the fuss and complexity of a conventional multiband compressor. There is more control available than it first appears, however, thanks to the new and improved sidechain EQ, which now provides up to 6 bands of any type. boosting a frequency in the sidechain is the same as reducing the threshold for just that frequency. That's true of any compressor, actually, but it's especially powerful when there are multiple independent bands. A high shelf band will give me control over the threshold for just the high band. Right, here's the guitar part. I'm processing the raw DI signal before the amp sim, and I'm playing very quietly. Notice the compressor catching just the pick attack transients. Now, if I play louder and drive the amp harder, how come the compressor isn't clamping down harder on that? Introducing the new auto threshold feature. With this turned on, the threshold floats around depending on your average levels, so you can use it to catch stuff that pokes its head up higher than its surroundings. I can imagine this being useful in many scenarios, like mastering, for example, if you need to control the micro dynamics without affecting macro dynamics. But I've been enjoying playing guitar through it. It can add some of the squashy feel of a tube amp. When I added some character, however, I went for the diode style rather than tube. Diode clipping is the basis of 1,000 different overdrive or distortion pedals, of course. But because the input signal is a raw DI and very low in level most of the time, even maxing out the slider didn't give me the guitar levels of drive I wanted. No problem, I just bumped up the input gain a bit. And because the threshold is automatic, I didn't have to adjust that to compensate. It just floated up a bit higher. Right, this is the bit where I have to demo the new multi-channel surround sound options, but in a stereo YouTube video. And it occurred to me, there are other types of multi-channel audio as well. Why don't I use a drum kit? Pro C3 will go up to 9.1.6 if you need it to, but I've gone with a relatively simple 8-channel setup here, with the kick drum on the low frequency effects channel, snare in the center channel, overheads in left and right, a stereo tom mix in the side surrounds, and room mics in the rear surrounds. The stereo linking knob in the sidechain section is now a multi-channel linking knob. If I turn it all the way down, all 8 channels will be compressed totally independently. Setting it back to 12 o'clock links the stereo pairs, so the overheads, toms and room mics are stereo linked, but still independent from each other. If you want the center channel linked to the front stereo channels, you can press the little button here. Turning the knob all the way up links everything, and this other little button opens a menu where you can specify exactly what that includes. I don't have any height channels in this configuration, so that option is greyed out. But I can include the low frequency effects if I want. And now all 8 channels are linked, and the compression is behaving more like a drum bus compressor, with every element ducking everything else. I'll be honest, I only set this up because I thought it would be more interesting than demoing surrounds channels that you couldn't actually hear. But I find myself rather enjoying the ability to compress every drum channel individually, with the linking at 12 o'clock or lower, and yet dial them all in simultaneously from one set of controls. Once again, the comprehensive sidechain EQ options mean we have way more control over this than it first appears. I'll create a band, then right-click, and choose to apply it to only the rear surrounds. That's my room mics in this case. I'll give it a broad and gentle high-frequency boost, so the compression clamps down harder on the highs in the room mics. Now let's have another band, this time for the side surrounds. That's my stereo tom submix. I think the toms are a touch too boomy at the moment, so I'll boost up about 100 Hz, and the compression now reacts harder to that region in just the tom channels. This is also quite a fun way to try out different compressor styles. This is the new versatile style, which, true to its name, has so far worked well on everything I've thrown it on. It can make these drums punchy, or tight and snappy, or it can smash the initial transients completely at its fastest setting. The release can also go super fast, putting us in that grey area that exists between compression and distortion. If you're into this kind of thing, or like to push the new character saturation hard, you might be interested to know that the oversampling options now go all the way up to 32 times. I think 8 will be plenty in this case though. Right, now let's switch to another new style in the modern category, smooth. Still manages to be super fast with these extreme settings, but there's noticeably less distortion. Okay, are you ready for it? Let's take it to the max with the TTM style. I wonder what that would sound like with a bit more attack. Or release. Just to remind you, the drums started out sounding like this. I can't remember when I last had this much fun with a compressor. As enjoyable as this is, however, it's not quite the vibe I had in mind for this part. So I'm going to swap this setting for a much more tasteful 2-to-1 gentle squash, using the new Op-L style from the vintage category. And I'll do a bit more of the same on the stereo drum bus. Notice the soft, pillowy vintage style punch it's adding when I toggle bypass for both instances. Okay, let's move on to the mix bus. I'm going to show you two very different settings. First of all, a very gentle 1.5:1 ratio setting using the new smooth style. This provides a very transparent, gentle glue. It reminds me a little of the older mastering style, which you can find in the utility section, only much less refined and polite. And I'm complementing this with a touch of the bright saturation in the character section. Contrast that with this very new setting from the vintage folder. I've set a much higher ratio this time, but also a big soft knee, and I'm riding the curve of the knee rather than hitting it with the full ratio all the time. And I've paired it with some tube character. This one isn't transparent, it's fat and vintage and glorious. I wonder if this would sound better without the stereo linking. Let's try turning the linking knob down. I like what that does to the ride cymbal, but the wide-panned guitar and keys are causing the stereo image to wander too much for my taste. So let's listen to the side chain, then add another EQ band, which I'll switch to a notch filter. And let's also make it really steep. And I'll widen it out so that it totally kills the mid-range, and then switch that band to only the side channel, which means all the mid-range covered by this filter is now mono. Let's listen to the compressed signal again. We now have compression that's stereo linked for the mid-range, but unlinked everywhere else. Okay, let's circle back round to that pad sound I started with. I'll open the sidechain panel, and this time I'll turn the stereo linking knob up, which gives us mid-channel only compression. Except now I'm also going to switch the mode to side channel only. And we're now not really compressing the dynamic range anymore, instead we're controlling the stereo width. Next I'm going to switch to the upward compression style. A few little things it's important to be aware of, however. Upward compression works backwards to conventional downwards compression by boosting the gain of signals below the threshold instead of reducing the gain of signals above it. This means that you can in no way expect the settings you dialed in for any of the other styles to be even remotely correct for the upward style. That's why I've been careful to turn the ratio all the way down before switching. Next issue, inherent to upward compression, is that a range limit becomes absolutely essential. Without one, silence would result in infinite gain boost, which probably isn't a good idea. But also, the maximum setting of 60 dB might not be such a good idea either. Consider dialing this back to something more sensible before you do anything else. Final health warning. Quiet sections and the silence before your song starts will be boosted by whatever you set for your maximum range. So unless you've been very conservative there, any kind of slowness to the attack could result in extreme transient boosts. The FabFilter devs are so concerned about that possibility that if you turn up the attack at all, you will get some automatic negative gain compensation, even if the auto gain isn't enabled. Honestly though, if you're wanting to shape attack transients, some parallel downwards compression is probably a better option and will result in a very similar overall transfer. True upward compression is arguably most interesting with the fastest attack, and maybe also a touch of look-ahead as well. Notice we now have more look-ahead options at the bottom. If you know you won't need more than 1 milliseconds look-ahead, you can pick that option and only get 1 millisecond of extra latency. Okay, great. I'm ready to turn up the ratio. And I'll set the threshold so the widest parts bounce up to meet it, but most of the time it's riding the upward curve. And notice how impressively wide this makes the pad sound. Okay, I'm going to noodle a bit more on that guitar and make a small confession. I lied earlier about using an amp sim. There is no amp sim. In fact, I'm running through 3 stages of Pro C3 character saturation, followed by a Pro Q4 with this setting, which was EQ matched from a Guitar Cab IR. If you're up to date with Pro Q4, you'll be aware of this instance list button at the bottom, which lets you control all other instances of Pro Q4 in the project. Well, now it also includes all your instances of Pro C3 as well, and the Pro G gate, and more of the FabFilter plugins will be added in future. I know there's been a lot of speculation about a possible FabFilter channel strip, and how awesome that would be. Well, it seems the FabFilter team had bigger plans, and are working on recreating the entire console. I'm going to cover these features in more detail in a future video, however, so I'll leave it there. As usual, you can find a detailed user manual in the help menu, or enable pop-up help hints when you hover over a control. That's all. Thanks for watching.